Test 1, 2. Test. That sounds about right. Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Maybe just a little bit lower, Dave. So, 2023. This is our first Sunday talk of the new year. This is going on the 22nd year that I've been in Florida, and shortly after I got here, I started teaching. So it's the 21st or so year that Open Mind Zen has existed. And Greg Layden, who's in the house today, can't see him because he's on the other side of the room, but he's the only one who's been around since the very beginning. There's been a lot of comings and goings over the years. It's good to see all of you. So I'd like to start with a koan, and then I'll relate it to some things that have been going on in my life lately. This is a koan out of the Entangling Vines collection. I don't think probably any of you have heard this koan. This one doesn't appear in any of our other collections, and whereas I've been going through these koans with Sensei Robert, we haven't gotten this far yet. This is towards the end. It's case 272. It's called Nanquan's Death. So Nanquan, just so you know, was in Japanese transliterated, it's non-sen. This was, you may remember, Master Joshu's teacher. He was famous in his own right, but he was also famous as being Joshu's teacher as well as others of that era. So, Nanquan's death. Sancheng Huiran had the head monk Zhui ask Changsha, when Nanquan died, where did he go? Changsha replied, when Shitao was a novice, he spoke with the sixth patriarch. Zhu said, I didn't ask about when someone was a novice. When Nanquan died, where did he go? Changsha said, the sixth patriarch told Shitao, investigate. Shui said, you're a 1,000-foot winter pine, not a rock moving bamboo. Changsha was silent. Then Zhu said, thank you for your answer. Changsha remained silent. So Zhu went back and reported this to Sancheng, who responded, if that's the way he responded, Changsha is 7 steps beyond Lin Qi, who's Rinzai. But tomorrow I'll go check for myself. The next day he went to Changsha and said, I heard your answer concerning where Nanquan went when he died. There's been nothing to compare to it before this, and there will be nothing to equal it later. It is truly something rarely heard at any time. Changsha was again silent. So this koan deals with a few different issues, but it's typical in the sense of Zen koans dealing with the notion of death, with the idea of death. And different teachers have answered that question, where do you go when you die, different ways throughout the millennia. But one characteristic of Zen teaching on this issue is they don't answer in a way that you can hold on to and say, aha, now I know what's going to happen when I die. In fact, if anything, you come away thinking, I don't see how that addressed the issue at all. Which, of course, is the point. Now, this guy Changsha was a successor to Nanquan. So he was being asked about his teacher. So essentially he's being asked, well, when your teacher died, where did he go? Right? And the question about Nanquan's death refers to a response when Nanquan was was asked where he would go when he died, and he said, "I'll be reborn as a water buffalo at the foot of the hill." This was considered, it's hard to imagine now hearing this, but it would have been an outrageous thing to say in that era where it was thought that enlightened beings went on to Buddha realms or Bodhisattva realms, not animal realms, which are considered lower realms, right? So uh, you can take from it what you like, but what I get from that, from Nanquan's original answer, is basically the same thing. He was throwing it back to the person to doubt, right? Not answering exactly where he goes, where he will go. So this Changsha, I'm sorry, this head monk Yu was asking Changsha, who was Nanquan's student, but now he was a master in his own right. And obviously, Nanquan was dead at this point. He's being asked the same question, and he's not being any more forthcoming about what happens when you die or where he's going to go, which is essentially happening, saying, well, what will happen when you die? Changsha just sits silent, right? And then, I'm sorry, Sansheng asks, I'm sorry, Sansheng says, well, Changsha is this amazing person with this answer. Well, all he did is sit there and not say anything. Why is that so amazing? But he's acting as if it's an answer like makes him just like the most enlightened person of all time, right? And he's saying that in response to this head monk who's gone and asked him the question, and then he goes to Changsha and he repeats that. He's basically praising him. He's saying, "Oh, that was the most amazing answer I've ever heard," and he was a master in his own right, so that was quite the praise, right? Changsha just sits silently again. So there's a lot going on in this, and I'm only going to have time to focus on some of it, but I find it really fascinating that Changsha was not at all swayed by the praise. How many of us would not be swayed by that kind of praise? Let's say if you work in a field, the expert in that field for the whole world comes to you and says, I've read some of your work and it's just, you are astounding. You are amazing. You're the most amazing psychologist. You're the most amazing computer engineer. You're the most amazing surfer that I've ever seen in my life. I'm looking at Jose when I say that. How would you react? Would your ego spark? Would you go, well, that's pretty cool. I am cool. I'm pretty amazing. But Changsha just remained silent. But essentially, I brought up this koan to look at the notion of death. As some of you know, my wife's father died this few days before Christmas. Also, one of my students, Gail Zivin, who some of you know, her husband died the day before Christmas. And looking around the room, I know many of you have had husbands, wives, or others that you were close to die. Since I've been here in Florida, my two of my best friends, one from childhood, one from college era, died in their 50s, and others that I know more peripherally. And so all of us, virtually all of us, have probably, within the last 10 or 20 years at least, lost somebody that we were quite close to. And if we haven't yet, we will. It's just the way it works, right? At the same time, before Christmas, I had lunch with my mother on her birthday, which is the 23rd of December. She's 96. And she said something interesting to me. So she's outlived virtually everyone that she knew. The only people who are still alive that she knew were some teachers that she knew that were like 20, 30 years younger than her. So she started teaching when she was in her mid-40s. And she said, I don't cry when people my age die. I don't cry when people my age die. It's like she totally just accepts it. And And like my wife's father, who was also an agnostic or an atheist or whatever, I'm not sure what I would have called him. I would call him probably an atheist, and I would call her, yeah, I'd probably call her an atheist too. I don't know if agnostic would be the right word. But in both cases, in talking to my wife's father and in talking to my mother, there doesn't seem to be, if there's any fear of death, it's certainly not an inordinate fear, especially as they both got older or getting older. Very little fear of that. So there is a lesson there, I feel. And over the years, many people have asked me, what does Zen teach about death? And or what do you think? I've had the same question asked me actually. What do you think happens when you die? And my answer to that these days is, well, what part of you is asking that question? What part of you is asking me, as if I'm more of an expert in death than you are, that question? And it's a good thing to look at, I think, when that arises within us. What part of us is so concerned about what happens at that point? So we have this chant that we do at the end of uh, meditation during retreats, and in Soto Zen monasteries they chant it every night. And the chant goes, "Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by, and opportunity is lost. Each of us should strive to awaken. Take heed. Do not squander your life." So they're not telling you what death is. They're just saying that life and death are of supreme importance. So, and I feel that what it means is, to the average person, life and death are of supreme importance. I mean, life is what we're living right now. That's important because that's what we're doing. And death is important because it consumes, I think, at least unconsciously or subconsciously, if not consciously, a lot of uh, thought, and there's a lot of fear about it. There's certainly a lot of teaching about it from a lot of different religions, but of course, as we've talked about many times before, what they say happens when we die varies tremendously, depending on who you listen to. So which one is correct? Which one of them has it? Which one's inaccurate? Which one's more accurate? I've also told the story before about my teacher when I was in Salt Lake City, Genpo Roshi, asking me the question once when we were going to dinner, what is it that the Mormons and the Tibetans have in common? And I could rack my brain. I couldn't think of what they had in common. They're about as opposite as you could get in most ways. And I said, I give up. What do they have in common? He said, well, they both tell you in really clear terms what happens when you die. And they're not the only ones. Those of you who've studied other traditions or practiced in other traditions know that there's very clear teachings on not only what happens when you die, but what you have to do to get to the good place instead of the bad place. Now, to get to the good place, you usually have to do the things they want you to do that are that are consistent with their religious teaching. And the one thing you have to make sure you don't do is doubt that. You have to make sure you don't doubt it, because that's where the devil comes in when we start doubting. So doubt is almost synonymous in a lot of traditions with the devil. What is the devil? Well, the devil isn't even really mentioned in Buddhism. There are demons mentioned in different, but those are more come from the cultures that Buddhism was originally rooted in, had teachings about spirits and demons and things like that. And some of that was adopted into Zen or Buddhism. In Tibetan Buddhism, you have all these different figures that appear to be devils and demons, or gods and goddesses, things like that. We have a few of them on the wall here, including the one that some of you have probably seen in back of where Kelly and Mike sit here in the Zendo. But in Tibetan Buddhism, the notion behind these images is very different than in some other religions. They're not considered to be beings that actually exist per se. They're what you could call an early form of an attempt at psychology, because they embody different forces which are at play in the human mind, which they recognized thousands of years ago were at play. Forces like anger, like fear, but also compassion and joy. All of these various human characteristics and parts of who we are all expressed in these various deities. But in Zen, you don't normally find a reference to deities, you don't find a reference to philosophies or dogma about death, just silence. Or we have the famous story of Isan's buffalo. And I'm wondering, because I've never heard the reference to Nansen's buffalo or Nanquan's buffalo as they're talking about here, and I'm wondering if those two names were conflated over the centuries. But we have this koan called Isan's buffalo, which is similar. Isan says, when I die, I'll be reborn as a buffalo down the hill. So it's a similar story. But he said, on the side of this buffalo will be 3 words: monk Isan such and such. Those are the 3 words. So again, he's saying, I'll be reborn as an animal when he's supposedly this enlightened master, which is shocking to people of that era. But then he says these 3 words will be written. And then he says, if you call it a buffalo, it's monk Isan. And if you call it monk Isan, if you call it a buffalo, it's monk Isan such and such. So he's totally tying up the logical mind with these various things he's saying. What's the point of that? What's the point of, in this case, Changsha being silent? He was silent with the question, he was silent with the challenge, and he was silent with the praise from another master. He was silent. What teaching is there? What teaching is there when monk Isan says, when I die, I'll be a buffalo, and these words will be written on the side of me? Kind of amusing in a way, right? So all this gets down to the way that Zen teaching approaches things like this, which is the opposite of a dogmatic approach. It's the opposite of a dogmatic approach in that you're being thrown back on your own resources and your own mind each time. And in the koan, remember where he said, investigate. Investigate. That's the opposite of, I know the answer, and it's this. And now you have to, if you really want to get to this place, you need to do these set of things in order to get there, and then you'll be born into this perfect place, and for the rest of eternity, you'll be in this perfect place. To which I reply, boring. Who wants to be in a perfect place for eternity? Honestly, do you? What's the perfect place? Is it floating in clouds up in the sky with other people who are floating in the clouds? Doesn't sound like that much fun after a few thousand years,
Everybody's fishing.
It'd be great for a while. Yeah. Everybody. There's a famous story in the Jewish tradition of this one elder who is approached by, I think by the devil actually, and he's given the option of or maybe by an angel. I can't remember exactly how this story goes, but basically he's given the option of going to heaven if he wants. And he asks I think it is an angel actually, and he asks the angel, well, are there people to help in heaven? Are there people suffering there that I can assist? And the angel said, no, in heaven, no one's suffering, And he said, well, I don't want to go there. I'd rather go to hell because there will be people to help there, people suffering there. That's like a true bodhisattva, right? Mm-hmm. That's the Buddhist notion of bodhisattva. Only in the Jewish tradition, it also exists. It's very likely that person knew that the literal viewpoint in Judaism at that time of what heaven and hell were was imaginary. So that was his way of approaching it. What would you deal with? How would you deal with that, right? If you were someone in that tradition, and someone who was very revered in that tradition answered in that way. So in Zen, we're always being thrown back upon ourselves, thrown back upon ourselves, thrown back upon ourselves. Now, a lot of people say that's what they want. A lot of us say, yeah, I'm independent. I want to come up with the answers myself. I don't want to follow some dogma. I don't want to follow some, just because it's been done that way for 1,000 years, 2,000 years, however many thousands of years it's been done. But do we really? Are we really willing to go into it deeply? Are we really willing to do that? That's what Zen practice and study requires. They start out by saying, well, life and death are of supreme importance. They're not of supreme importance for some imaginary or theoretical reason. They're of supreme importance because we're living and we're going to die. That's why it's so important, because we're in it. The moment we're born, guess what? There's only one thing that has to happen the moment you're born, and it's not pay taxes. Don't have to. I know people who've never paid taxes. I actually do. At least not certain kinds of taxes. They paid some, they liked it or not. But that infant that's born only has to accomplish one thing in that life, and that's die. So we are handed a death sentence the minute we're born. I have this theory that the ego cannot imagine. The ego self, the controlling ego certainly cannot imagine its own non-existence. Think about it sometime. Sit there and think about, what would it be like to not exist? Can you imagine that? I can't. I can't imagine not existing. And I'm not saying that we won't exist in some form after death. I would more likely be silent, like Changsha did. It's a lot more accurate. So again, going back to the question, who or what within us is so concerned about what happens after we die, and why? I think it's an excellent question to ask ourselves. And my personal experience of this practice is that the important thing is, are we living? Are we dead while we're living? Are we half dead all the time, walking around with lack of awareness and lack of joy and compassion, and also doubt in our life? So doubt is the key. It's the way in. Without doubt, there's no way in. There's just no way in without doubt. We have to deeply doubt and go into that doubt and resolve it in a way that works for us personally. It's a very personal practice. There appear to be these general teachings, right? And there are general teachings in Zen. There's lots of them. They appear to be dogma at times even. But my feeling is, certainly in Zen, at least, they're not. They're all throwing us back on, what is your experience of this? How do you experience this? And if you're asking someone else what it's about, what does that imply about your understanding? Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with asking someone else's advice, but on issues like this, I feel that the important thing in my own life is to embrace not knowing about it, or what I call at times the mystery of it. Now, mysteries by their very nature are not resolvable, but they can be felt and experienced. Mysteries can really be felt. Like if you're confronted with something that's really deeply mysterious, meaning that there's not, I guess one way of looking at it, or how I would look at it, is that There's not a logical explanation for why this is the way it is. I don't know how or why it started. I don't know why I'm in a position where I'm able to experience it, or how long that'll last, or whether that'll last after I die or not. I don't. I'm not sure anyone else does either, despite what they may assert. Maybe they do. Maybe there are some who are absolutely sure. Some people say, well, I've had a near-death experience. Well, I've had near-death experiences, but that doesn't mean that when I actually die, it's the same as the near-death experience was. There's an implication there, because I have a near-death but don't die, that it's the same as when I actually die. Is that necessarily the case? Maybe, maybe not. Or you could just be silent. Yeah. Or I've gone into really deep states of meditation where it feels like the ego is totally dropped away, where there's not any sense of person anymore. There's just the experience itself. So that means when I die, that's what's going to happen. Maybe, maybe not. The answer I usually give when people ask me the question actually about what happens when you die is, I'll let you know when I get there for a small fee now. We're not so small fee now. So far, I haven't tricked any of you guys into paying up. But in a way, isn't that what some teachings are doing? We're essentially trying to trick you into thinking that if you just are a strong enough adherent of it, and you know what? We're never that strong of a practitioner or adherent of it that we ever quite get there. We're always just not quite there. Just not quite there. That feeling of incompleteness, that feeling of I'm just not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not deep enough, not enlightened enough, not holy enough. I'm just not there. And so, what are the implications of living with that as our primary basis for life? That I'm incomplete. What is incomplete? It's only incomplete if we think we're incomplete. Otherwise, we're just a being that's as complete as it's ever going to be. It's as complete when it starts Zen practice as it is in the middle or the end. It's no less or more complete when we're more ignorant of that fact. So what happens in Zen practice, in my experience, is not that I become more complete, but just that I become aware that there was never anything missing in the first place. That's why there's a lot of references in the koans and the literature in Zen about, well, best not to start this whole search in the first place. Well, of course, by the time that happens, anyone reading that is already engaged in it, or they wouldn't be reading it, including myself, when I first started out with this stuff. Reading all this stuff. See, that's where I went wrong. When I first started practicing with my first teacher, I didn't know what I was doing, and so it really went well. And then when I had my first opening experience, which happened after about a week of being with him, then I started reading about experiences like this and things like that, and the Zen and all this other BS, and it totally messed me up for about a year and a half afterwards. It took so much struggling after that, but I see now that I was triggered, by that initial awakening I had, and I was triggered into the ego wanting to possess that and understand that, just like the ego wants to possess and understand death, or possess youth and understand death, or whatever. There's a lot of things the ego tries to possess, actually everything. It tries to possess understanding, for instance, an understanding of death and understanding of life. What if it's ununderstandable, though? What if it's a mystery that can't be understood in the form in which we're attempting to engage in? What if that's the case? Then what? What if it's the case that we are not incomplete? Then what are we doing here today? Well, we can just be enjoying each other's company. I like that. That's Sangha. We can be listening to someone talk about the Dharma, but what's the Dharma? Is it anything special? Is this person here anything special? more special than me in some way? Or does this person understand something I don't? Really? Are we willing to admit that we understand? Are we willing to admit that we're complete? Sometimes that's not easy. So if we admit we're complete, then what happens to the chasing part of the self that's always chasing, that's always looking for something additional and on top of what we already have? What happens to that? You can probably guess if you haven't experienced it already. Relief. Release from the constant struggle of it all. Does it mean when we stub our toe it doesn't hurt like hell? No. Does it mean we don't cuss when we stub our toe? Yes. I mean, no. Maybe if Wendy does, she doesn't cuss, but I do.
She cusses.
Okay. See, I knew he'd chime in if I said. So does it mean we don't experience pain? No. Does it mean we don't even suffer every now and then? No. Does it mean when somebody dies, we may not mourn for them? Well, in my case, no. But there's something that shifts when we realize we're complete. It can be a complete person mourning rather than a broken person mourning. That is a difference, I think, for the person. Thank you, everyone. I thought maybe I'd open it up now. And by the way, the second period of sitting was a little shorter because I thought this talk might go on a little longer, and also I have to leave early. When I'm doing talks, it's a little harder to run out the door before it's all done. So anybody who'd like to speak on this subject or talk about what came up? Yes, Mike.
I had a friend that passed away a few years ago, and on her deathbed, she said, "I'm not afraid to die. I just don't want to."
Mm-hmm.
And it struck me that's like as about as good as it's going to get.
Yeah. Yeah, I think how many people really want to? There are probably some who do that are in a lot of pain, but probably most don't. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So I like what you were talking about. I'm trying to remember how you worded that. Don't doubt. There lies the devil. And thinking about all the different religions and ones that I've been in particular, right? It's all about, God is out there. There are angels. Beware the devil. It's very outward facing at times, and that's, I think, one of the things that I've come to really appreciate about Zen is the devil is here, the angel is here, God is here, life, death, darkness, light, here. What now? And so I don't know, I just really love that about Zen, and I think the fact that doubt is not only encouraged, it's like a chief part of our practice, right? And I just love this practice. So anyway, I really enjoyed the talk. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, doubt is, you find it in all different forms in the ancient koans and stories. It's really interesting. Yeah, you find it, and sometimes people misinterpret koans because they're not getting the format of the teacher's using to try and inspire doubt. They had all kinds of tricky methods to inspire doubt. Some of it was kind of almost like practical joking on a certain level. It wasn't a joke per se, but it was a similar method. Two people conspiring, two who have been practicing a while conspiring. Yeah. Anybody else?
I was thinking when you talked about the perfect place, about how when I think about death, I always think is what's the place I'm going to? Heaven, hell? Am I going to be a ghost? Am I going to be reincarnated into another body? And I'm always thinking about what's the place I'm going to go to. So my mind was sort of thinking, what is death without a place to go to?
Mm-hmm.
That I always think of
it's
where.
a good question.
Where?
What is? Yeah. Well, what do you think?
I don't know, but I think it's something to ponder.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think about death. Okay, maybe this will happen to me. It's like, well, take that away, take that
Mhm.
place away. What do you have left?
Well, take everything away, and what do you have left then? That's the real question. Time, place, position. Think about it. Without a body, the brain stops functioning. And without our brain, how can there be a sense of time or place or any of that? So what's left after that happens? You could say, you could answer by saying, well, consciousness, awareness, but I don't know. Would it be so bad if there were nothing, if just this was it, and you just, that's it? Would that be so bad? It's a good thing to ask ourselves.
Roshi, as I listened to you, I kept coming back to the idea that we get here because we perceive that there's a problem, that the great religions talk about a solution because they understand that people perceive a problem. I can't really find the problem. There's only a problem if you say something has to happen a certain way in a certain time.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
if I'm not holding on to an outcome or a timeline, I don't have a particular problem. I just have circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah, because we don't know what the timeline is. I remember reading this thing by Dr. Rondell years ago when I was doing the Rondell work, and he said, well, people act like they want to know when they die, but what would it be like if you really knew when you're going to die? And he was actually, the way he presented it, it sounded not so great of a thing, to know when we die. So maybe we can let that be part of the mystery, because we don't really ultimately have a choice. We can fight against reality or we can accept reality. And what are the qualities of those two states? Fighting against reality, we're always struggling against what is. No matter how hard we struggle, you cannot avoid what is. Can't. If we're not fighting with it, then whatever happens, we work with it, which is, to me, a much more realistic way of living, and
We're
involves
fighting what we imagine what is, because
exactly.
even then, if we don't know what death is, what are we really fighting? We're fighting our fear of something we don't know.
Precisely, yeah.
Well, just to piggyback on that, though, the fear, that is very real. And I know growing up in the Midwest, it's culturally ingrained, that fear. And I think that's what really drives most of us. It's the race.
Yeah.
And I think it's a mistake to, not that anybody was doing that here, but it's a mistake as teachers or as practitioners working with other people to dismiss that. It's fertile ground for practice, but it's very real, and I think that drives
Oh,
a lot
sure.
of it.
Fear is very
And,
real. It's real for me,
And I think part of that was why I was running from that, and why
Yeah.
I love Zen so much, because that's I can examine this, I can look at this, I can work with this, and it takes time. It
Yeah.
takes a long time.
Yeah.
But it's very real.
I'm not saying I don't personally have any fear about it. Also, I think I do have some fear of it. But again, going back to what Russ just said, the fear that I have is based on some expectation, or some fear of what could happen that may never happen. I don't know. I don't know what the moment.
Or it's just the ego holding on, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I want this, and I can't imagine
Right.
it going away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wendy.
I don't know about death, but I do believe the reality that I have is I have this body on this planet at this time. And I do believe that I make my own heaven or hell right here, right now.
Yeah, that's a very Buddhist notion. Could be why you are Buddhist. It is. Yeah.
But it is doubt that got me here through various religions that I have, studied at collegiate levels, and with rabbis and priests, and there's always that doubt. always the doubt.
Hmm.
And that's what got me here. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah. Funny how that works. Fear and doubt are the things most people despise the most, and yet that's what it got at probably all of us here in some way or another. Anybody else on this issue? Okay, well, thank you very much. Have a great afternoon. Let's see if you would turn off the recording. So a couple of